I want to say welcome to everyone who's joining our call today. I have no idea what number in our State of the Industry series. We've been doing them all summer, but today's focus is sustainability. And we have three panelists here who are going to share a little bit about their experience in that area. I'm not one of them, so you may notice we are one panelist short. Stephan Haugen had a fire drill in his space. Oh, it looks like he's joining us again. Okay, that's good. So we're looking forward to his participation, and he's back, so that's good. So without further ado, my name is John Frazier from Career Services, and our panelists today are Marian Brown, Stephanie Lavallato, and Stephan Haugen. And they will share with you a number of interesting things about what's going on in the field of sustainability. I'm going to ask, if you're not in the panel, to just mute your camera for the moment. We will have Q&A at the end, and we'll welcome everybody to be part of that. So that's good. And there's Stefan again. Everything safe?
He's in his car.
Okay. That's fair.
Hopefully the building isn't burning down.
Right.
No, I think it was scheduled right at 10 o'clock, so I timed it perfectly.
See, it's all in that.
Yep.
All right. So without further ado, I'd like to ask the panelists to just introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit, perhaps about your educational background, where you work, a little bit about what you do. I'm going to mute my camera because nobody needs to see me, but they definitely want to see you. And anyone can start. Maybe Marian, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Okay, age before beauty. Marian Brown. I head the Center for Sustainability and the Environment at Wells College. I've been doing that for just a little over 6 years now. Before that, I was at Ithaca College doing sustainability work. My academic background, my undergrad degree, was in biology and chemistry. And from the notes, you see that I have a 95 alumni designation. I did a master's in what was then called corporate communications in the Park School while I was working full-time at Ithaca, which has proved to be fairly interesting to me, although I think Stephanie will talk about, she's doing an MBA, a sustainable MBA. I would have killed to be able to do that at the time. That was the area that I felt I was the weakest in terms of understanding sustainability, the economic drivers of it, and the economic impacts. What I do here at Wells is threefold. One is we have a sustainability academic program, so I teach in that program fundamentals of sustainability and some other coursework. And as part of that, we try to find applied internship and research opportunities for students here on campus or in the local community. I also work with operational managers here on campus to try to make our campus operations more sustainable and more environmentally sensitive, if you will. And then the other part of it is I just help tell the story, what Wells is doing and the larger sustainability message.
Very cool. Thank you, Marian. Stephanie, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Lavallato. I was a 2013 Ithaca grad in the Environmental Studies program with a minor in economics. My interest in kind of career area that I've kind of been focusing on is the intersection of climate change and corporate action and holding companies accountable to their actions and transitioning towards a more sustainable economy. As Marian said, I'm currently also in a part-time MBA program in sustainability at Bard College, which I started about a year ago. And they're a young program and among the pioneers of today's MBAs, trying to really embed sustainability into every course and not just have it be a concentration. And so I can speak a bit about that later. But I also work full-time at an international nonprofit called CDP. It used to stand for Carbon Disclosure Project, but we do more than just carbon work now. And so we don't go by that full name. But what CDP does is we are a global environmental disclosure platform. So you can think of financial disclosures that companies are obligated to disclose to the SEC or other agencies. We run a voluntary disclosure platform for environmental data on how companies are impacted by climate change, water security, and deforestation. And that data then feeds into their stakeholders like investors or large purchasing companies who are interested in that data from their supply chains. And so where this kind of fits into my career interests is trying to enable particularly the financial sector, who has a large role in financing climate change behavior, getting them to understand the risks to their business models and their revenue from climate change, beyond just, physical risks of hurricanes and droughts and whatnot, but consumer demand, shifting preferences, regulation. And so it's a very interesting space to work. I sit on our capital markets team and oversee our commercial data partnerships. So licensing data to big, data providers like Bloomberg's and MSCI and a lot of these big names that I never heard of until I got here. But it's been an interesting shift going from kind of more of a activist-minded corporate accountability perspective to kind of being embedded in the system, but seeing that as a lever for change, giving companies the tools to understand the impacts that they can demand from other companies or change within their own organizations, their own practices to shift to a more sustainable and often more economically appealing, or there's economic opportunities in the transition as well. So I'll stop there.
That's great, thank you. Stefan.
What's up, everybody? My name is Stephan Haugen. I from Ithaca in 2013 with a Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry and then a minor in art history as well. Actually, Steffi and I were both tour guides in the Office of Admissions together, so I'll give a little shout out there. But anyway, so I graduated from Ithaca. I started doing sort of just kind of bench chemistry work, and I've sort of worked my way into an analytical realm, doing a lot of mass spectrometry. So I'm kind of more on the basic sciences part of this whole equation. But at my current organization, I work at the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado. And we're actually the only national lab, all Department of Energy funded for sustainable energy. And a lot of other labs focus on nuclear or other approaches, but that's our one focus is basically all renewable energy sources. So I work in the bioenergy sector, which is basically trying to create polymers and biofuels from biomass. I work with a very specific polymer called lignin, but yeah, there's a bunch of cool aromatic compounds in there that we can break down through a bunch of different approaches, genetic engineering, catalysis, separations, and try to isolate compounds that are economically viable for companies. So that's another piece, is that kind of along echoing what Stephanie was saying about economic, incentives for companies to get into the sector. That's kind of our entire mission at NREL, is either creating a space for that, making compounds that are sourced from renewable sources rather than petrochemicals, and basically forcing prices lower so that companies have no reason not to go that direction, or partnering with companies and creating solutions along the way from their internal processes with our kind of intellectual property. So yeah, this, I'm super happy to be at NREL. It's an incredible place to work, and there's so many places that are, so many offices and labs here that are focused on really, really cool stuff. So I'd be happy to talk about any of that as well in different areas. My focus, like I said, is in biomass, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's a lot, all of you. That is a lot to unpack. And it says a lot about the scope of the work being done. So one of the things, of course, that we're all aware of is we are in COVID-19, which has put radical changes into really all of our workplaces and educational places. What impact are you seeing COVID-19, I guess in a broad sense, having in the field of sustainability, recognizing that is truly a broad field, but also within your organization? I'll give you a moment to think about that. That was a big question.
Well, I'll weigh in really quickly because I work a lot with waste management here on the campus, and COVID-19, of course, has been has intersected directly with the whole state of the recycling industry that's in a state of near collapse because of the Chinese sword, the national Chinese sword impact, where we have been for decades sending most of our recyclables overseas for processing and remanufacturing into other products. But we've been doing a poor job of it and sending a lot of contaminated material. And finally, countries overseas were saying, enough, we're not going to take it, and raising their standards for quality of those materials. And it's basically collapsed the recycling end market in the near term. But, and then coupled with COVID, when many of us were working from home, we've always had this fantasy that if we put our recycling out or our trash, it goes away. And we don't think about it anymore. Well, now, because many local systems were also impacted by COVID, local recycling systems were closed down, and costs were going up for that. People suddenly are starting to say, wait a minute, what is with all this recyclable material that now doesn't have an end use? Is there a better way to think about this? And to start to question our incredible use of disposables in this country. I mean, of course, right now we have a short-term issue with so many of those disposable single-use items are the preferred item as opposed to reusables. And I hope that's just a near-term kind of issue that I think it's raising awareness among people that we really need to figure out better end uses for this, creating circular economies, that, you know, waste shouldn't happen in the system, that we should be figuring out ways to recycle and reuse. And it's really creating, I think, some interesting new thinking about some of this. It is creating short-term pressures, no doubt. We're going to have a huge issue with waste materials from all the disposable personal protective equipment out there that's largely being viewed as single use, and so huge waste stream issues near term. But I think it's expanding our thinking a little bit about the larger issue of why do we have this disposable economy? How do we be using more? I know NREL is really looking at energy uses, but how are we looking at using renewable resources for disposable single use as opposed to petrochemical products for those applications as well? And is that the highest best use of petrochemical resources, which are going to be declining, if not eliminated right now? So we have energy impacts right now that are fueling all kinds of interesting discussions that I'm sure Stephanie is learning about, you know, stranded assets with oil fields and all the rest of it. So I think it's a mixed bag. There certainly are short-term pressures, short-term issues. I hope they're short-term. But long-term, I think it's starting to get people thinking a little bit differently about these things, and the whole environmental, social, and governance issues with companies. People are starting to take another look at, like, well, why do I want to support a company like that? Or why would I invest in a company like that? So I think it's heightening some of these concerns.
Thank you. Interesting. Stefan.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Marian. I think, so going back to some of the single-use plastic things and kind of I don't know, you're right, it's a short-term crisis with long-term implications, which it has been for a long time. But I kind of have one thing that's just involves me here. If you guys check out Bottle, BOTTLE.org, there's kind of a powerhouse team here at NREL working on plastics upcycling. And I know we hear plastics upcycling, that kind of buzzword thrown around quite a bit, but they're approaching it from a whole new different direction. They've got millions and millions of funding from partnerships with ExxonMobil as well. So yeah, it's a really exciting prospect, and it's actually my PI, Greg Beckham, who's working on this. and he's kind of the head of Bottle, and it's a consortium with a bunch of different national labs, MIT, Los Alamos, and yeah, it's kind of approaching it from a bunch of different directions. Like I said before, we're using catalytic processes, separations processes. So from a basic science perspective, it's a really cool way to start thinking about how we're going to use and solve this problem where we can't just ship our things back to other countries to recycle for us. Because there's been problems with color of plastics, of polymers. There's been issues with polystyrenes, all kinds of different variations of polymers. And their approach is basically single stream, digest along the way with a bunch of different approaches, and then out the back end have value added products. So I encourage you guys to check that out if you're interested in that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I had to say regarding single-use plastics, but I'll let Stephanie jump in if she has anything there.
Yeah.
Sure.
From my experience at CDP, it's definitely more of the kind of macro view of how these current times in the pandemic has shifted perspective. You know, at a high level, Marian mentioned environmental, social, and governance factors, what the capital markets industry calls ESG. And, you know, in recent years, it's been booming of investing in companies who are prioritizing those issues or opportunities. Again, they shouldn't always be looked at as in a negative way, but what investors have seen since the pandemic, obviously we've had a market crash, but companies who have higher ESG performance are proven to be more resilient or are bouncing back better. And so again, the economic opportunity in these kind of values or business practices, a lot of it comes down to energy efficiency or reducing emissions or being aware and managing risks. There's a lot of money being funneled into companies, as well as, you know, investment opportunities in startups or research ventures to, you know, try to solve some of these bigger monumental issues. And so as it, you know, impacts our work at CDP, when the pandemic first hit, we weren't sure if companies were at all going to consider environmental disclosure a priority when they're trying to grapple with disrupted supply chains and all these other issues. But as kind of we got through that initial phase, what we're seeing is much more engaged interest from, again, the stakeholders who influence the companies, the ones who are funneling money into the companies, the investors, purchasing companies, et cetera, who are demanding this data and this information from companies. So again, you have a investor like a BlackRock or a Goldman Sachs who want to know how all their holdings companies are addressing climate change risks. Even more so, there's a push to better understand the science. There's this, for the last 5 years or so, been an initiative called the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And, you know, companies can set ambitious goals to reduce their carbon emissions, but if it's not actually in line with the 2-degree trajectory or some of the actual science behind what's going to get us to, you know, a secure world, some investors don't want to hear it, or they don't think it's as credible. So what the Science-Based Targets Initiative does is set pathways for each industry on how they should be reducing emissions and what that share looks like across a sector. And so does a 25% reduction over time actually translate to a 1.5 degree or 2 degree world? And investors are actually beginning to have these conversations in much more interest and frequency with companies saying, do you have a science-based target? Are you setting a science-based target? And CDP is kind of a facilitator of those conversations. We act as kind of translators between the science and the kind of corporate world at times. And so I do think there's been a bit of an awakening understanding that climate change will likely have, if it's not already having some of the same systemic disruptions that COVID has brought upon us. And investors are kind of seeing that, again, from an opportunistic landscape, but also like from that risk aversion perspective as well.
There's an interesting article available through LinkedIn, written by Bill Gates. It just came out, I think, in the last week. And he talks about how COVID-19 is signaling some of the future likely impacts of climate change and how we should be looking to respond. It's a really interesting linkage between the two.
Well, I really hope, I mean, from a public health perspective, we're kind of seeing, I don't know, things that get the most plays maybe, you know, are some misinformation things and conspiracy theories, but I really hope that that comes out of this thing is a better understanding of scientific literacy, how we're applying it in our everyday lives regarding human health, regarding decisions made about the environment. I mean, it's been, honestly, in my opinion, a deficit in America for quite some time. So I'm excited to hopefully see a little bit of that come around.
A theme I feel like I heard a little bit in all of your answers is, to some degree, taking science more seriously in the equation and recognizing how science can be an economic driver of change. Would you characterize that as true?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. And just to build on Stefan's point, I definitely agree that, you know, I hope to see this shift towards integrating science more. But considering the stakeholders and the industries that I work with, and even myself in an environmental NGO, there is this, I guess, knowledge gap in understanding the science and applying it in ways that actually translate to change. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for folks like IC grads, depending on what we've studied, to be empowered to kind of move into that space. I definitely see myself as kind of a crux between, you know, again, investors, asset managers, people who are, you know, they're very bright quants that sit in these firms, but they sometimes don't know the first thing about how, or the details of deforestation and water security issues as it relates to an impact on a company, and the science behind that all. And so we've got staff internally who are, you know, experts in this, and being a conduit for that information to translate it into why it matters for business or other stakeholders. I think there's going to be a greater need for that as the world begins to understand that science is critical in order to tackle these challenges.
I would say too, it's beyond even scientific literacy. I mean, media literacy all plays into this as well. But you know, as hopefully people on the call understand, that there's three sort of discrete but very highly interrelated knowledge domains embedded in sustainability. One is, of course, the environmental impact of what we have. The other is the economic impact, and woven through all of this is the social impact, the human rights and wealth disparity, all these issues. And so it takes not only knowledge in all three of those domains, but it takes real critical thinking about how do those interweave, how do they conflict, how do they support one another, which is why the ESG platform for companies is kind of interesting, because it forces them to think about what are those relationships, those who report them. And when investors and customers are thinking about that, again, it sets companies back to say, well, how do we respond to income inequality, whether it's our employees or how we bring our product to market and position it in the marketplace, all kinds of things. So I think it's important that we really focus on critical thinking as well. There's very little of that happening right now. It's, you know, sort of a digestible soundbite that is given out and accepted as whatever, depending on your persuasion and who's saying what. But I think we really need to be looking to foster really deep critical thinking for ourselves and within our industries.
Fully agree.
And
So
to ask that of our leaders politically
please.
too, I'll say, you know, to demand that at the voting level, I think is really important also.
I also agree. Stephanie, you started to talk a little bit about sort of how you see what's happening translate into opportunities for people kind of entering the field or planning to enter the field. I'd love to hear each of you share a little more about what you're seeing and perhaps some thoughts on how recent grads can navigate this environment and engage with opportunity, perhaps in new and novel ways.
I'm happy to start that.
Thanks.
Being also a current student myself, in my MBA program that I mentioned before, me and my classmates are kind of always on these jobs boards or opportunities looking at different things. And for one, I could say that it seems like, especially in the corporate sustainability space, people are still hiring. People are understanding that there's a need for this type of role, given what we just shared in the last part of this discussion, that there's opportunity and demand for knowledge in this space. Some of my peers who are more active in a job hunt right now than I am have been very active in attending webinars. That's been maybe a blessing and a curse of this pandemic, is the overload of online information available being shared. So do find whether it's organizations or coalition groups who are putting out this content, attend them. But my classmate has had, one of them, very good success with reaching out on LinkedIn to whoever was a panelist who she wants to maybe do an informational interview with on LinkedIn. And, just like knocking doors or any other type of outreach, you'll have success with some of them and less success with others, but it's allowed her to get her foot in the door and have great conversations with people in an industry that she's really passionate about. And, if I've learned anything since my time at Ithaca, networking is absolutely critical and really can change the game in a job hunt or a career search, even if it's something that you're not planning to move jobs in the immediate term. Those connections go a long way. And so that's one tip I would have is engage in the online kind of information sharing webinar structure, and don't be afraid to reach out to speakers afterwards.
Thanks.
Oh, I can't speak from being a job hunter anytime too recently, but what I do talk about with my students who are interested in sustainability as potentially a career path is, again, the idea of critical thinking about this. Be aware of what you know and what you don't know to be able to make really deeply well-informed decisions and actions. So as Stephanie said, you can get a doctoral degree with webinars on the freely available at this point. Figure out what you need to know more about and go search out that information to deepen your understanding of the issues related to sustainability. But again, I think if you want to present yourself to an employer, let's say, like Stephanie, you came out of environmental studies and a potential employer might look at that and say, well, so she gets the green stuff, maybe doesn't know about the economic piece or doesn't understand the social inequality piece of this. Figure out ways you can beef up your knowledge there and demonstrate that, whether it's with internships or volunteerism or whatever, to show how you've been able to embed and understand that information and synthesize it together to have a much greater understanding of what sustainability truly means. So just some thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I come from like I said earlier, kind of more of a basic science research environment. So for me, my strategy has just been to kind of make myself more useful. So learning other analytical platforms in my cases, I'm sure there's been a lot, kind of probably a much bigger increase in this since I left Ithaca, but learning coding languages like R and Python and just being a little more dangerous in that sphere, being able to understand science, present it appropriately in a clean data format, I think is really, really important. So if you haven't started doing that, definitely get on that. But yeah, I think also just echoing what Marian and Steph are kind of saying, I think the translational piece and understanding critical thinking is so important. And that's something that I think in the next few years, I'm definitely trying to pursue myself. Is now that I have this subject matter expertise, I can sort of advance a little bit higher into more leadership and areas that kind of have a bigger wake behind them rather than just more of a data guy. So yeah, I think the translational piece is so important. And if people don't understand what's happening in the science realm, there's not going to be the change that we need. So yeah, I think that's my input on that.
I think another important piece to recognize about the field, as Stephanie said, there are more and more positions out there that are coded specifically as sustainability practitioners or advisors, consultants, whatever, within organizations. But many of them are not. Many of them, you might environmental health and safety. It might be very specifically targeted in an industry. But don't let that stop you. If you see something that you have the academic background for a career, nothing stops you from becoming an entrepreneur once you're in an organization and bringing to bear what you know or the questions you know how to ask and research and find answers to. You add value to that organization every time you do that, and you burnish your own reputation and your skill set. Everything that you can do and everything you can know about sustainability. So even if you're forced in the near term to take something that is not as near and dear to your heart, use that as a learning opportunity and a platform to make change. And again, that opens up more opportunities for you down the road.
Excellent. So what I'd like to do is open it up to questions from folks who are here on the call, and anyone, whether you're a student, a recent alum, a faculty, or a staff member, are welcome to comment. So please, this is your time. And all you have to do is unmute your mic. If anyone is having difficulty doing that, let me know. I think you should be able to, but.
I apologize. I have a 2-year-old, so there might be.
No problem.
It was really nice to hear all of this. I am currently a full-time staff member at IC, and I'm also in the Master's of Accounting program as well. So I'm really interested in, that just the relationship between planet and profit. And Stephanie, I might have missed this at the beginning. I know you're in a sustainable MBA program now. What was your undergrad program at Ithaca?
It was environmental studies, and I had a minor in economics, but kind of part of the reason why I chose an MBA is, a next step is a bit of kind of what you just acknowledged, is trying to understanding that play between purpose and profit and making the business case, because as we said, there's plenty of opportunity, but it does take a lot of kind of internal change and influence within an organization or on an organization to actually see that come to fruition. And so that's why I'm at Bard.
Yeah, that's helpful. One thing that stuck out to me that you said particularly is I guess playing this role as like a conduit between like the science side and the kind of business side of it. And I'm wondering, because I don't really have the science side of it, I guess is like my question is, how much does that come into play, kind of in like the business side of, the sustainability world, right? And how much do you kind of rely on your scientific background to succeed in this area?
Sure. I don't feel like that in my experience, I have to be an expert in the hard science and really know the ins and outs of those mechanisms of the way science is applied. At CDP, we've got staff in different teams who are more subject matter experts in the climate science, in deforestation matters, and where I am more of that conduit is taking the information that I learned from those teams and giving enough information to the stakeholder. It prompts that critical thinking. It prompts the discussion for them to have internally. And you look at bigger corporations, for example, Microsoft has recently come out with these really ambitious, big climate commitments. They've got scientists on the inside who are helping them with that too. So being that conduit doesn't mean you have to be the expert in everything, but it's helpful to have that knowledge, that surface level knowledge, enough to speak at a depth that makes the impact or makes it stick. But what I've learned to do is it's obviously not a bad thing to say, I need to go get more information on that for you if I'm not the expert in the question I get, because it's, as we said, it's important to make sure the right information is being shared for these critical issues. But kind of being, I don't want to say a generalist, but being able to speak to both sides is a skill that I've learned is very important.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I'm wondering also, I am super interested in the Sustainability MBA at University of Vermont. And I'm wondering, I'm sure that all programs are a little bit different. I'm wondering kind of in that program, what is the balance between, again, the business side of it and the science side of it? Because, those are both huge pieces to the equation. And I'm wondering in that program in particular, like how much is it mostly just, you know, the business side of it, or how does that, like, what's the balance there?
Within the program at Bard?
Yeah.
Sure. We are not learning, you know, science foundations. We're, for example, my first year was mostly business foundations of accounting and finance. I just took economics this summer. The sustainability is embedded in all those courses, right? So Marian mentioned stranded assets before. We've had phenomenal guest speakers who come in and help us understand where the sustainability fits into those conversations. But as an MBA student, and where, you know, the traditional MBA student would want to go after the program, is typically not something in a role like Stefan. You know, we chose the MBA, most of us, for the path we see forward that is more corporate facing or in other institutions. I'm at a nonprofit, and MBAs are still valuable in my experience here. But again, doesn't require the deep science, but it's teaching us to think in a systems thinking format. It's teaching us to understand the impacts of the science on business, but not necessarily have to be the expert in the biology or the chemistry behind those forces and changes. So what I like about the BARD program that I touched on briefly in the beginning is that it does have sustainability embedded in each course to some capacity, and brings that relevance in upfront, as opposed to you learn sustainability on the side and have to do that critical thinking on your own.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Thanks for the questions. Excuse me. Other questions that folks might have? Give folks just a second to navigate the tech end of things, and otherwise I have a follow-up. All right, I do have one, which is simply this. As you think about this moment in time, and both where you are and what's going on around us, what's something you wish you had learned prior to this moment in time that would have been helpful to you?
My gut reaction is a little bit of what I've touched on already, but that you don't need to be the expert to be impactful. You know, I was saying to Marian kind of before the call started that particularly in this MBA, that we've been given the mindset that the world needs sustainability experts. And again, that's sustainability, not specifically science, but we should feel empowered based on the knowledge that we've gained through our educations at Ithaca or elsewhere, to if we are you know, if we have the skills of thinking critically and understanding the interplays of all these different things happening in the world, you know, we can contribute to these conversations or these businesses or these organizations who are struggling to address these issues, and that shouldn't deter you from seeking opportunities. So Marian kind of addressed that before in kind of the job search advice. But, you know, it kind of comes down to confidence, I guess, but to not be deterred by an opportunity where you don't feel like you are the expert.
There's an interesting third confluence. We're talking about COVID, we're talking about climate change, but the Black Lives Matter movement, for me, brings to the fore that this is a sense that I have, that even within sustainability circles, we can pretty easily balance or think about the environmental impact and the economic impact of what we're doing. What's really hard is to think deeply and systemically about what's the human impact of this, especially on underrepresented groups, people we don't know, people who are removed from us, that are impacted by decisions and choices that we make, whether it's individually or nationally or even globally. That's the part that falls off the table far too often. And if I had, I mean, that's the area that I struggle with still, is to have a really deep understanding of what's the human cost to what we're doing. It's easy to see what it does here on campus or in our local community or even nationally. It's really hard to see in a global community, what are those global human impacts of our resource extraction, of our waste production, of all of the various embedded impacts that we haven't figured out how to quantify as well. The quality of life, income disparity, resource allocation, all kinds of things. That's the part that I think we all need to be doing a little better job with. I certainly personally feel that. And it's, again, something that we need to do deep critical thinking about.
Well, I think you raise an excellent point, because there's data out there. I saw this reported this morning, and I was a little bit aware of it, but it sort of heightened that awareness, that the African American community seems to be very disproportionately impacted by COVID. And that's not necessarily a biological issue as much as it is an equity issue, access to these resources. And so I think you make an excellent point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, something that I guess is less of a tidbit that I wish I knew and more of a behavioral observation, and it echoes Marian entirely. I feel like for me, when I see these things or read about them, I don't know, maybe it's a conditioning thing over time, but I've historically gotten pretty dismissive. And now I feel like, I don't know, it's everything's at the forefront, and I feel myself a lot more oftentimes confronting the issue, giving it my perspective from science or other aspects of my life. And yeah, I think that absolutely applies to climate change. I think that applies to all these social matters as well. Yeah. So don't be dismissive, use your voice.
Great advice. Very, it's really an amazing moment in time, really. And I don't think we'll fully know the impact of this moment in time probably for decades. But so much of the work that's being done by all of us in small ways, I think, could truly change the world in ways that we might want it to be changed. So, final question, and it's just this: any words of wisdom that you would just like to share with us? It can be on anything at all. There have been a lot of words of wisdom already shared. I might add to that, but
kind of stemming on the comments of the last question, particularly around kind of social impacts and the world we're living in now and whatnot. One thing I feel like that this whole experience has shown us is the importance of kind of community and community resilience, and particularly in this time where if the market is tougher for jobs, getting engaged locally, I think is a huge educational opportunity, and just experience to build resilience at that local level. I think some of what I'm being taught in the MBA is creating change at that scale first can have monumental impacts later on down the road, or domino effects to other larger communities. And so that's one way that I'm trying to be more engaged today, and understanding the impacts locally so that I can assess what's going on, particularly in my backyard. But I think it's important from all angles, from being able to think critically and learn what's happening on the ground, to expanding your skill sets, but also kind of leaning on community in this time that is so unknown to all of us.
Thanks, Stephanie. Something
I try to instill in our sustainability education is that everybody can be a sustainability practitioner. Whether, and this is obviously, John has framed this as looking at career opportunities, but becoming more sustainable as an individual or learning how to make more sustainable decisions is just a practice. Every time you're looking to make a decision, think about what is the environmental impact of what I'm going to do, what is the social impact of what I'm going to do on me and others that are related to this decision, And what's the economic impact? So you can start to think about in small ways, being more mindful of that. And that will, you know, if you get disciplined about doing that, that spools up to what you do within your workplace, what you look at for a career. And again, it's always looking to be more informed. Janelle asked the question about how much do I have to know about science? And sustainability is like drinking from a fire hose all the time in all the domain areas. You will never know everything, and you'll never have an information base that is permanent. It's constantly changing. You just have to make decisions and informed decisions based on the information you have at the time. Stefan is out there developing whole new answers to questions that we have now. So the questions change, the answers change, and we have to be just mindful of bringing in information all the time and critically analyzing it and putting it together in new ways to think about making better decisions. And again, it can start small with whatever you're doing every day, and then rolling that up to what you look to do as a career path, doing that with others in an organization, doing it for a customer base, whatever. So again, think about what you're doing every day as a sustainability practitioner in everything you do, and it's going to roll up to what you do in your career path.
Excellent. Thank you, Marian.
Yeah, I was actually heading that direction, Marian. I really like the idea of kind of the only constant is change. And I mean, having all of us come from scientific backgrounds, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call as well, I think that's just kind of an inherent piece of the scientific method. And we're kind of having a really interesting national scientific experiment right now that's changing constantly. The questions have changed, the answers are sometimes right, sometimes not, and we're getting conclusions that are not really there yet. I mean, we don't have a timeline as to when this thing's going to stop. There's scientific principles that we're observing, but you know, it doesn't mean much unless policies are enacted. So I feel like staying abreast with your local environment, like Stephanie's saying, looking at the national narrative, what's happening. I think I've been treating this whole public health thing as an experiment that I'm just observing. So just kind of going with the flow, understanding that all of this is going to be different in 6 months than it is right now. As far as the looking at potential job opportunities and things like that, I really liked what Marian was saying about being an intrapreneur. That's something that I found myself doing early on when I first started working after Ithaca. I was working at a company basically doing pharmaceutical drug testing. And sustainability was not a part of their practice whatsoever, but as long as you've got a voice and you can try to make waves in your company, your community, all of your networks, I think that's what is really, really important in terms of sustainability moving forward.
Thank you.
I think just in general too, I think all of us fail to recognize the things we do know how to do and the things we know, and to be really mindful of sort of documenting what we can do, especially if you're looking for the next job or just a reflection of, geez, did I do anything this last year? To really be mindful of that and to be thinking about developing those skills as you go on, because you can present a resume to a future employer and they're never going to know. You know how to do X, Y, Z that would be really interesting that's not on their job description for a new position. So to be thinking about kind of creating that tool belt and stocking it with new tools all the time, and be able to show that to a prospective employer.
Thank you. We're just about at our time, so I want to thank the three of you, Stephanie, Marian, Stefan, for being part of a really robust and interesting discussion. I'm going to need to actually go back and watch this because there's so much good information that came out today. For folks who want to do the same, it will be up on our YouTube channel probably in a couple of days as soon as I have a chance to edit it, put the titles on and such. And please feel free to share it with other folks who couldn't be here today. There's such great information. Shameless plug time, Career Services remains open in the pandemic, and we're seeing lots of students and alums to help them navigate these waters and their career paths. So if you're one of those folks, feel free to reach out to us and we're glad to help you. All right. That brings us to a close. And again, thank you so much for being part of this today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. Stay safe, everybody.
Well,
Yeah. Be well, everybody.